Shalom. This coming Shabbat has also a special name, special title, Shabbat Hagadol, the Great Shabbat. Why do we call it the Great Shabbat? Shabbat Hagadol. It's a very greatly appreciated Shabbat by the Jewish people. And yet, there is nothing significant or anything that we do in order to emphasize through any kind of reading, any special reading for Shabbat Hagadol. There is none of the kind. You know, in the past month, we had 4 times, there are 4 special portions of the Torah that we read in those special Shabbatot of last week. Beginning from the Shabbat before Purim, we have a Shabbat that we call Shabbat Machatzit Shekel. We read a special portion to remind the Jewish people that they should give half the shekel for in remembrance of the half the shekel that they used to give in the time of Bet HaMikdash. And that, of course, reminds the Jewish people to give tzedakah, to give charity, because charity brings the heart into the other fellow man, and automatically there is more love and there is more respect between each other. When you help others, there is a reason for which to be very happy, and the happiness and the joy of Purim is enough to justify that. And therefore, the Jewish law requires that we should read on that Shabbat before Purim. I'm talking about 2 Shabbatot or few Shabbatot before Purim. We read about Machatzit Shekel. That is happening on Rosh Chodesh Adar, from the beginning of the month of Adar. And then the Shabbat before Purim, there is another portion of the Torah that is, of course, additional to the usual weekly portion of the Torah. We read another portion from a different scroll of the Torah that we call Shabbat, that we call Parashat Zachor, and that is for the Shabbat exactly before Purim. That's called Shabbat Zachor. Why? Because we read the parasha that has to do with Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek has done to you. And since we know that Haman, the enemy of the Jewish people, as brought in the story of Purim, so which reminds us of Amalek, since we believe that Haman also was a scion of Amalek. So therefore we read the Megillah, but before that we read also the parasha of Zachor to remind us of what Amalek has tried to do to the Jewish people, from which we still suffer until today. And then we have Parashat Para. After Purim, there is another Shabbat that we call Shabbat Para, because we read an additional portion of the Torah that is known as to be the portion of the Torah that discusses the law of Para Aduma, the red cow, which, as we have explained in the past, we don't know the real meaning of it, but it used to be done in the time of the Bet HaMikdash. And it used to be, they used to take a red cow, and the red cow was to be slaughtered and burned, and then the ashes should be used to purify people. After Shabbat Para, we have the 4th one, that is Parashat HaChodesh, when we bless the month of Nisan, especially this year, which happened, Rosh Chodesh happened on Shabbat. So on that Shabbat last week, we opened the Ark of the Torah, and we took out 3 scrolls of the Torah. The first one we read, of course, the weekly portion of the Torah, the Parashat HaShavua. On the second we read the portion of Rosh Chodesh, And then we read in the other Torah, we read the portion that is talking about this, the fact that the month of Nisan is the first month of all the months in the Jewish calendar, and we read a special portion for that. And then now we come to the fifth Shabbat of great joy, that is the Shabbat before Pesach. The Shabbat before Pesach is known as Shabbat Hagadol. This is going to be this coming Shabbat. But there is something surprising. There is no special portion of Torah except the weekly Torah. We don't open a second Sefer Torah to read a special portion that reminds us of Shabbat Hagadol. And the Jew must think, why is that? All we can do is assume that Shabbat Hagadol, as we are going to explain the reason why we call it Shabbat Hagadol, for which, by the way, there are many reasons. Some people even think there are about 100 reasons why do we call it Shabbat Hagadol. That is, of course, the Shabbat before the Jewish people departed from the land of Egypt, in which they were enslaved for so many years, and finally the Shabbat before their sortie of Egypt is known as the Great Shabbat. We can understand that even by nature. I mean, for them, that Shabbat was the last Shabbat in Egypt. Imagine, after 210 years of slavery, it is only understandable that they should feel great, that they should be big. And that Shabbat was known as to be the Great Shabbat for them. I mean, the happiness was something incalculable. We cannot evaluate the happiness that the Jewish people had when they were about to be finally out of Egypt. So that's enough for us to call it Shabbat Hagadol. But our sages say, as brought in the Tur, in the Shulchan Aruch, that a miracle happened. Everybody knows that the god, one of the gods of Egypt, of ancient Egypt, was an animal, a little lamb. The lamb was the god of the Egyptians. That's the reason why no one ate the lamb there. And why? Because it was one of their gods. But at the same time, God is asking the Jewish people that before they leave, they should do what we call Korban Pesach, the sacrifice for Pesach. They have to sacrifice a lamb and eat it. That was a terrible thing for the Egyptians. I mean, we know that the Egyptians were already afflicted by the 10 plagues that practically destroyed them morally and physically and financially. But nevertheless, I mean, there is still something left in them, and that is their natural feeling of prestige. I mean, you are going to slaughter our God? Doesn't make sense. So there was a possibility of an eruption of some kind, that the soldier would come and perhaps kill the Jews for doing such a thing. But our sages said that all that happened is that the Egyptians looked with, of course, a heart that was naturally angry, but they didn't do anything. They left the Jews doing it. In fact, they saw how the lamb, before they slaughtered it, they saw how they attached it to the feet of their beds, which was a terrible dishonor for their God. But that was a way how God, because our sages said that when God punishes the people for their sins, he begins first with their God. So the Egyptians did get their punishment for what they did to the Jewish people, but at the same time even their gods suffered. And we have more to say about this, but that's not the issue. Except the Baal Peor, a certain god that was left till the end, but all the gods of Egypt were destroyed at that time. So that's the reason why, that's one of the reasons why we call it Shabbat Hagadol, the great Shabbat, because of this miracle that the Jews were not attacked by the Egyptians, despite the fact that the Jews were commanded to slaughter their God, the God of the Egyptians, one of the gods of the Egyptians. I would suggest also to give another reason. It's only a natural reason, as small as it sounds, but there is something in it. You see, Pesach, the holiday of Pesach, is memorable. I don't think there is a Jew who does not celebrate Passover. Pesach is the beginning of the future of the Jewish people. The redemption of the Jewish people happened in Pesach. And our sages said, Benisan nig'alu mimitzrayim, uvenisan atidim lehigael. The Jewish people were redeemed on Nisan, which of course declares the coming of Pesach, since Pesach falls in the month on the 15th of Nisan, right? And the Jewish people are promised that their redemption, the future redemption, will happen also on Nisan. By the way, what does it mean? It means that the Jewish people, after they were redeemed from Egypt, they were to expect also other problems in the future for which they will be redeemed. In fact, the Talmud says this question, and even Moses says to God, let us first take care of the first trouble. Don't now give us another trouble. Okay, but we are happy to know that there is going to be a great and future redemption for the Jewish people. For 3,000 years, the Jewish people suffered, in fact. For 2,000 years, the last 2,000 years, the Jewish people were persecuted in a way that's unbelievable. So we know that we need a redemption. Of course, we call it a Mashiach, yes. A Messiah is coming. We know he is coming. What does it mean? So leave it to the sages to discuss what kind of life we will have when the Messiah comes. In fact, according to Shmuel, there is an opinion of Shmuel, one of the greatest sages of the Jewish people, who lived about 1800 years ago, and he said, Olam keminhago noheg. Don't expect the time of the Messiah to be any different than other times. Nature will remain the same. The world, what it's used to have, will have. But there is only one difference, that when the Messiah comes, at least the yoke of the nations upon the Jewish people will be lifted, which means the Jewish people will finally be totally free. That's also a kind of redemption. But it does not mean that our nature will change, that there will be no more evil inclination. There will be evil inclination. There will be even poor people, as the Torah says, "Ki lo yechdal evyon mikerev haaretz." Even poor people will continue to be poor people. Why is that? Because the Jewish people needs to have a few people that are poor, so that through them we can exonerate ourselves from Gehinnom, from hell. All right? So there is not one. Let's coming back to the thought of Pesach. Pesach has been so endeared by every Jew that even non-religious Jews celebrate the night of the Seder, the night of Pesach, in which we sit and we eat no bread at all, for whatever it means, as the Torah requires from us. For 7 days we should not eat bread, we should not have bread, we should not see it, we should not have it at all. So therefore Jews are extremely busy to clean their houses from any trace of chametz, even ta'arobet chametz, even a mixture of chametz, which means even whiskey, for example. Whiskey, we cannot leave it at home. So what do? We are not going to throw it and to throw it in the garbage. We don't throw things in the garbage if it's worth something. So what do? There is a way by selling it to the goy, and automatic for 8 days, and it's not ours, since it's not considered ours, so automatically we have cleared that way our house from any kind of chametz. Nevertheless, we have to be very careful to get rid of any chametz that we know, like bread, or any crumbs of bread, or anything that has to do with bread has to be cleaned. The rest, if there is something left that we don't know, so we eliminate it from the heart. We annul it from the heart, thinking that it's not here anymore, and that's all. And the rest, if there is a possibility to sell it, usually Jews go to their rabbis and they give them their chametz, as signed in a document, and the rabbi takes care of that by selling it to the goy for 8 days, and so forth. And that's how we clear ourselves from the chametz, which we don't even understand why. What's the big deal? Bread is very dear to us. We eat bread every day. It's our friend. Suddenly bread becomes our enemy. The best is not to ask too many questions, because no answer will satisfy you. But nevertheless, the Torah tells us that we have to be careful not to have chametz, not to see it, not to have it, not to own it. And that's all. We don't know why. Of course, there are reasons. The Kabbalah says that chametz means, it swells up. The dough swells up, and that's how you prepare the bread. So it symbolizes the fact that we should be very careful not to have conceit, not to be haughty, not to let our heart swell up, because this is the source of all the problems of hatred, of disunity, and lack of fraternity. That's because people think that they are better than others. We shouldn't. We should love every Jew. We should love everyone. And that's how we can bring the redemption, no question about it. So the chametz, since it represents swelling, so therefore it's a no-no for the Jews on Pesach. But believe me, that's only one way how to explain. But the truth is, a true explanation is only it lays within the mysteries of the Torah. God does not have to explain to us every single mitzvah that He ordered us to do. God knows, that's all. We have to believe that the Torah is true, and therefore we do it with faith and love. ואהבת את השם אלוקיך בכל לבביך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. We love God even when we don't understand His ways. So therefore, that's why we don't eat chametz on Pesach. So we celebrate Pesach like free men, like kings. We sit. There are many laws regarding how to sit, how to eat, how to drink, how many cups of wine do we drink the night of Pesach. We read the Haggadah, the story of our forefathers in Egypt, and the redemption and the splitting of the sea. Wonderful. And at the same time, we invite all the family, and we sit together with the family, the children, the grandchildren, and we are very happy the night of Pesach. There is an atmosphere in the night of Pesach that is unequal to any atmosphere for the Jew, of course. We even, at a certain time during the night of the Seder, we open the door to show that everyone is welcome. At the same time, we don't fear anymore any of the fears that the Jewish people had throughout the centuries. But the night of Pesach, we have a promise that God is protecting us. Lel shimurim hu Lashem. All this made Passover, Pesach, very special to the Jewish people. So special that the atmosphere of Pesach begins already from the month of Nisan. From the beginning of the month of Nisan, we already feel. You smell the air, you smell Pesach. Of course, that's because you see Jews, especially our wives, our mothers, so busy cleaning and making sure that everything is clean. It's unbelievable. Even Jews who are not religious are committed to this custom in such a way that's unbelievable. The Talmud says in Masechet Psachim on page 7, I think, there it says that even though usually women are not supposed to be witnesses, but except for cleaning the house and making sure that there is no chametz. If the woman tells you, I have no chametz in my house, you have to trust her. That's it. Why? Because throughout the centuries they have demonstrated such will and such love for the mitzvah of preparing for Pesach that they are definitely believed. And we can assume that everything is fine. So now, what I said here, that all this has created an atmosphere of Pesach that begins already even a month before Pesach. I remember in Morocco, I was just a little child, and I remember all the streets of the Jewish streets where Jews lived only in Jewish areas, in Meknes, in Morocco, in every city, and all you saw was, first you smell the smell of paint, white paint, because everyone is busy cleaning, painting, unbelievable. And that created an atmosphere. And this atmosphere was so great that we don't need to read a special portion for the Shabbat before Pesach. Because it's possible that the reason we read the parasha before Purim, Shabbat Zachor, and even before Shabbat Shkalim, and the Shabbat Para after Purim, and then Shabbat HaChodesh in the month of Nisan, we are required to read a special portion. Why? Because in those Shabbatot, perhaps we need a little more encouragement in order to absorb the atmosphere, even though Purim also has its own atmosphere before it begins. But well, that's already something different. Shabbat Zachor, Parashat Zachor is a requirement of the Torah. But the others, perhaps it's a kind of way to enhance our feeling, the atmosphere. But Pesach does not need that. And Shabbat Hagadol, we are already ready for Pesach, and therefore there is no need to read another portion that tells us about Pesach. Pesach is coming, the atmosphere is here, everyone is ready for it, and everyone is anticipating that day in which we are going. By the way, the night before Pesach, on the 14th of Nisan at night, every house we take the candle and we go and search if there is a trace of chametz, maybe some crumb of bread that was forgotten, and in fact it's already cleared. However, we have the custom to prepare 10 crumbs of bread. We spread them in every corner of the house, and then we go and look for it at the light of the candle. All this is creating a tremendous atmosphere. Children, they love it. I mean, we cannot even think about having Pesach without those great things. And the customs and the laws and everything, so many laws that have to do with Pesach. All this creates a tremendous atmosphere. Therefore, Shabbat Hagadol, although it is Shabbat Hagadol, it is the great Shabbat, but at the same time, we don't have to take out another Torah. It's sufficient that we read the weekly portion of the Torah of Parashat Metzorah, which soon I will talk about. But that already, the atmosphere is there, and therefore we are ready for the coming of Pesach. Well, let me wish every one of the Jewish people a happy and kosher Pesach. See, when it comes to Pesach, we add always the blessing of kosher, Chag Kasher v'Sameach. We don't say that for Sukkot or Shavuot. That's already a different story. But Pesach, we also bless each other with a happy Pesach and kosher Pesach. Has to do with kashrut. It has to be kosher. The Jewish people is moved to the core and the fibers of its system with the thought of Pesach, because we love it. We know that there was a redemption in Pesach, and there will be the final redemption for the Jewish people. We hope and pray that we will all be present at the time when the redemption begins. It already begun. Baruch Hashem, this week we had the election in the land of Israel, which again shows some surprising outcomes, and it looks like Baruch Hashem, everything is fine. Netanyahu Bibi is again the Prime Minister of Israel, and that makes us happy. He's a great man, no question about it. May God bless him and give him courage to continue. And at the same time, we bless the other parties, and we hope and pray for unity among the Jewish people, because as I said many times, dissension is killing us. But at the same time, love between each other is our redemption, and that's a way how to be prepared for the coming redemption, which hopefully will come soon. Be'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach. Amen.